on Zoom. We've got 55 participants, so amazing to have you all here. Or if you're watching on Facebook Live, a couple of housekeeping notes. We are recording this, and it will then go on to live forever on our YouTube page, which I'll drop the link in the chat and in the comments there too. Everyone will be muted throughout. Please leave any questions and comments, and we will get to them as much as we can at the end of our presentation. And I'm hoping we have lots of time for conversations around this exciting topic. Okay. So would we like to get to the Mentimeter? Is that where we want to go?
I would like to introduce Dane, if I may do that.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The reason that Dane is here doing this again this evening is because I know his uncle Rick Carlson. Rick and I went to school together. We were in the same class. We were in band together. He played first chair trumpet.
Oh, sorry, I muted you, Nancy. So sorry.
Okay, I don't know where I got muted at, but
chair trumpet.
Huh? So I welcome Dane Carlson. I would call him an extremely talented hometown son. Also, he's an exceptional international landscape architect. He's of Principia College, Harvard University, Ball State University, and the United Nations. For the presentation he's doing today, this was his undergraduate project. And for it, he won an American Landscape Design of Architects Student Honor Award. And I think that this speaks volumes about somebody producing what you're going to be seeing this evening as an undergraduate. So Dane, if there's anything else you'd like to say about yourself, please do that. And what we're going to do now, first, I got out of sequence. Thanks, Em. You tried to pull me in and it didn't work. So we're going to do a little word cloud thing first, and Em's going to put that up. You're going to use only one word. You're going to drop in there one word, not two words, not a whole sentence, one word. And the question you're going to entertain is, what do you envision at the NIPSCO site? What do you envision at the NIPSCO site in one word and one word only?
Okay,
and Em has put the link in the chat.
Yes.
So if you click on that, you'll reach it. For those of you that are on Facebook, Em already dropped the link in comments on Facebook. So we're going to populate a word cloud.
Yes. And so I dropped the link so you can use that, but I'm also going to share my screen so we can see the word cloud starting to populate. Okay.
And then, Em, since you're on Facebook, if you could pick up any of those that people are dropping in comments because maybe they don't understand whatever, that would be great.
Yeah. Can we see this coming? Everyone seeing the word cloud populating?
Yeah, people are writing in chat. Click on the link that's there and enter your response via the link, and that goes directly to the word cloud.
All right, public is definitely getting some love. Oops. And as we go, we can maybe share it again at the end. If I see anybody others comments or things, I can add
Sure.
them in as we go. Just too many screens happening right now. But maybe we can share it again.
I've overtaxed your multitasking.
I've only got as many tabs as I can have.
Okay, great. Okay, very interesting. Just looking at this, we see public coming up in the center there. And that would be the #1 response from people that have participated in creating our word cloud today. Next higher ones, I see nature, beach, recreation, and a whole bunch of really inspiring things around that too. Okay, great,
Yeah.
everybody. Okay, so that's sort of our icebreaker for this evening. And the other thing that I'm going to ask M to do is to get up the the timeline. M, can you do that?
Yeah. Here, I've got lots of, oh, here. Okay. You all see this? Good. Can we see this?
Yeah, there's something going on. We can see the things on your desktop.
Yeah. Let me see if I can just, this is
Okay.
best I get.
Okay, that's good for now. That's good for now, Em. Thank you very much. Um, I thought it would be important just to set some important historical things that have happened where the NIPSCO Michigan City site is now. And this is a timeline that I pulled together with the help of Matt Werner. So I want to acknowledge him for some of these dates. In 1920, the Hoosier Slide, which was the largest sand dune in Indiana, was leveled. It was completely gone at that point. 1929, construction of the coal burning power plant started. In 1931, the coal burning power plant began generating electricity. And then in 1974, there was a major expansion of the power plant, which included construction of the water cooling tower. I know there's a misconception amongst a lot of visitors here that we have a nuclear power plant here, which we don't. And I'm just going to tell a very brief little story about this. People ask, why do we have the water cooling tower? And the reason is because there was a group at Elston Senior High School called the Earth Club. And when NIPSCO announced their expansion, they realized that this could be a problem because of warm water being put back into Lake Michigan. There were going to be fish kills, there was going to be algae growth. So this Earth Club actually started petitions. They gathered thousands of signatures from people in Michigan City. They went to the public hearing, they spoke about the issue, they delivered the petitions, and they made a request that NIPSCO be required to build the water cooling tower. And NIPSCO was required to do that. And my little part in that is I actually was a member of the Earth Club. So I have very fond feelings for that. I think it's a tribute to tenacity of youth in our community that actually made a difference for us. Okay, 2022, NIPSCO announced the closure of the power plant. In 2026 was the planned decommissioning of the power plant, and that had to get pushed back because of solar panels not being able to be delivered off of the ships during the embargo. And then they had to move it back to 2028 just because they were behind in their renewable green energy switch. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
And I'm sorry, I already introduced Dane, so I'm not going to do that again. So,
Okay, I've got one other thing before we get started. I just have a small statement from Save the Dunes that I want to share before we get started, written by our wonderful executive director, Betsy Mayer. Tonight's Green Drinks is different from a lot of our programming. Instead of educating the community on a policy issue, the local environment, or looking back at our history of advocacy in Northwest Indiana, this session presented this evening is an imagined future for what our lakefront could be. The decommissioning of the NIPSCO Michigan City Generating Station is a hot topic in the community. and we have already received lots of feedback and opinions since announcing this presentation of what the community thinks this space should be used for. We hope that tonight's presentation provides an example of some natural landscape options for this site and how public access can be prioritized. We want to be clear that tonight's presentation is not the ideas of Save the Dunes. This is Dane's envisioning, and we are excited for our speaker to share his vision and hopefully invite thoughtful questions and dialogue and inspiration for the site that benefits both the environment and the people who live, work, and recreate in Michigan City.
Okay. Shall I get started?
Yes, Dane, please. And if there's anything else you'd like to tell our participants tonight, feel free to do that.
Sure. Okay, so I just shared. See my screen all right?
Yes, we can see it, Dane. Thank you.
Great. So, yeah, thank you very much for the gracious introduction earlier, Nancy. So as Nancy mentioned, this work comes from my 2010 to 2011 undergraduate thesis in landscape architecture at Ball State. I want to, clarify that this is a project that I did more than a decade ago. It's certainly not an authoritative vision. It's a proposal of possibility. And I will admit freely that the list of answers or the list of questions that I don't know the answer to is much longer than the list of questions that I do know the answer to. And so this is really meant to provide some possibility for what a future may look like. There are a lot of considerations that I didn't make, as a 23-year-old undergrad student. And so that's a little bit of context. A little bit more about me, just briefly. I was born and raised in Michiana Shores up at Stop 37. Spent a lot of time at the lake as a kid and adult. Graduated from Michigan City High School in 2005. And today, I generally am a landscape designer and researcher, landscape architect. I have a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture from Ball State and a Master of Landscape Architecture from Harvard, the Graduate School of Design there. And for the most part today, my work focuses on climate justice in the Himalayas. So I'm kind of revisiting some old thoughts here, but certainly have informed a lot of my work in the interim. So I just want to make a note, Nancy mentioned this a little bit, that certainly this landscape and a lot of the other landscapes around it along the kind of southern edge of Lake Michigan and obviously across the world, but this place in particular, share long histories of ecological loss and destruction of various kinds and other types of exploitation of land. She mentioned that the Hoosier Slide once stood on this site. These are some photos of that dune, which you can see in the bottom photo, the bend of Trail Creek, kind of essentially right where the the turbine buildings stand right now. It was something like 200 feet tall, and it was essentially all trucked down to Muncie to be made into ball blue glass. In 1919, it was kind of eulogized in some newspapers. And interestingly, they estimated, someone at the time estimated that a steamboat captain, that they'd taken up to 250,000 people here from Chicago annually. Anyway, so some important context there, that the dune you see in the top photo is now the site of the primary kind of infrastructure of NIPSCO. So the purpose of this proposal, which again was meant to be kind of a design visioning of possibility of the site, is essentially to address 4 primary criteria. The first one, I'll kind of go through these one by one and also expand on each a little bit. The first one, the notion was essentially to establish kind of a gradual framework for reinitiating ecological systems that once inhabited this site. And one thing I want to make clear here is that it would necessarily be a long-term process. Nancy already told us about the long duration of NIPSCO's shutdown, and kind of inherently, especially due to the amount of contamination, which is likely still on the site, this would take a long time. and through kind of work like phytoremediation and things like that would eventually kind of manifest in a public usable space. But I think it's maybe a little bit naive to assume that this site would all be immediately publicly usable at the moment of its closure. So anyway, so this gradual reestablishment, one of the ideas that I'll work with here and I'll explain a little bit later is that this is not really a master plan in the sense that I'm not talking about kind of a one-time vision of something. It's a plan that's developed with an understanding that landscapes are always changing and that the ways that we live within them and adjacent to them has to be always changing at the same time. And so it's also not an attempt to return to what used to exist, but an understanding that the site has been fundamentally changed, and what comes in the future must be, you could argue, something new, not an attempt to kind of return to something that existed before. And I'll mention that again in a few minutes. I also, number 2 mentions this idea of kind of the coexistence of human and ecological systems. I don't want to belabor this point too much, but one of the kind of fundamental ideas of Western society is the division between humans and nature. And I think this kind of work is an opportunity to reject that separation, to understand that there's really no division between humans and nature, that essentially what that leads us to is that the opportunity for structuring a site like this is for expanding opportunities for the relationships between humans and ecological systems that help us to kind of blur that boundary, right? And so one of the ways that I've thought about this a little bit is kind of understanding the site as an ecological laboratory that would essentially continue to change over time. And for this, kind of a exploration and learning and co-creation between humans and ecology that would happen over time. And when I show you some more drawings, you'll see what that looks like. An important principle of this was number 3, which is essentially to use what exists as a platform as a foundation for remaking the site. I suppose my argument then and still now is that it would be problematic to erase everything that exists on the site now, because it has been and can remain a reminder of what has been done, of the legacies of the land and the legacies of erasure and damage. And I think that full-scale erasure would kind of argue that these things never existed and that we can return to a previous state. So, part of the idea, this is really in some ways about memory, is a need to come to grips with the harms that this kind of, pollution and things like that have come from industrial development. And then number 4, kind of a no-brainer here, but I was really interested in public space and also expanding relationships between community and site. One of the things I think I would be a little bit negligent in not mentioning is that, and we all know that beaches in this community are essentially mostly a privatized commodity, mostly accessible by relatively wealthy people who live in certain neighborhoods and less so by others who don't. And so part of the idea was essentially to propose in part to expand the beach as a public realm, for example, to be easily accessed by people who live in North End communities and those who have had to bear the burden of being next to the plant for decades. So those are some of the kind of structural logics of the plan. I also want to mention that this kind of idea of post-industrial revitalization is not a new idea. There are some really important precedents in landscape architecture and other disciplines. Just 2 examples here. On the top is a park called Gasworks Park in Seattle, and on the bottom, Duisburg Nord Landscape Park, somewhere in post-industrial Germany, I think East Germany. Essentially, these are both kind of post-industrial sites that have been remediated and made into public community assets, not sites for commercial exploitation, I'll note. The one on the top was actually opened. The revitalized site was opened in 1975. So there's a long history of these kinds of ecological remediation through phytoremediation, bioremediation, and those kinds of things. And the bottom one is a little bit more extensive. Essentially, it's a former brownfield site that used to house steel production, among other things, and really was a helpful precedent for me in articulating my work. essentially the idea that the designer had was to preserve as much of the existing site as possible, as a way to evoke the memory of the place and the healing of the damage that was done. So these are some precedents for us to look toward as we move forward. And so I will just give a rough outline of the NIPSCO site. I know that I'm really interested in this kind of reuse, and so I want to really address that as a central component. Something that certainly I would love to think through more is the question of phytoremediation, and what that means. So just generally here, I have outlined some of the primary components of the site and its topography. So the boiler buildings on the left, the coal conveyor systems, the coal ash pipelines going from left to right, and the cooling tower on the right side. And obviously, we all know a lot of the easily visible pieces of this infrastructure. I will move on to some photos of the interior of the site. I was fortunate enough to, as I was an undergraduate working on this project, be given a tour of the site by, I won't say I remember his name, but someone who worked at NIPSCO and was gracious enough to show me around and take me through almost the entirety of the site. So my proposal was primarily focused on the shoreline, on this kind of heavily armored shoreline, which as you see now, and I'll show you in a few photos in a minute, is kind of made up of a series of layers of steel sheet piling and concrete and probably limestone riprap, essentially, that are designed to make sure that the shoreline changes as little as possible, which of course is the opposite of what happens in a kind of normally fluctuating beach system in this context. I think at this point that the settling ponds have all been emptied. They may have been filled. I'm not entirely sure what the progress of that is, but I know that it's not certainly in this state anymore. One of the things you'll see here is that I have this kind of chartreuse line running horizontally, which is the coal ash pipeline that, as far as, according to my understanding at the time, was used to kind of ferry the coal ash from the plant over to the settling ponds. And this comes up later in thinking about opportunities for reuse. So another photo, I know not everybody has been able to see, or maybe very few of you have seen the interior of the site. So this is just one of the panoramas that I took in, I guess it would be winter of 2010. So again, settling ponds kind of in the middle right, sheet pilings on the far right and far left, and the access road in the foreground. Again, another image here. You can see Mount Baldy on the far right side, and the sheet pilings, which essentially, like I said, armor that shoreline, and one of the coal ash settling ponds in the front left here. So this is one of the kind of the primary characteristics of this site, is that there are a lot of these sheet piling walls along Trail Creek and along the Lake Michigan shoreline, which essentially were placed in the early 30s and backfilled with a mix of coal ash, soil, and sand. Coal ash is, not known for being free from environmental pollution. So I think some research demonstrates that it carries heavy metals and that those leach into the water and things like that. And so essentially this is a made land, or some might go so far to call it, as far as to call it reclaimed land, which is a bold turn of phrase. And essentially this has been the landscape that has existed, I think really since the early 70s here, and is only just now starting to be dismantled. Although, like I said, as far as I know, the coal ash ponds are now empty. That coal ash has been taken elsewhere, and they may have been filled. So that's a little bit TBD. Another photo of that shoreline and the coal ash pipeline in the foreground, and I'll come back to this in a minute. And some photos from the interior of the site, which show the area of coal storage. I'm trying to remember in specific terms what they told me at the time. I think I remember that they kept something like a 30-day supply of coal, essentially sitting out on the ground, brought in on rail lines from the west, in Utah maybe. And one thing certainly to consider here is that there was a lot of leachate coming directly off of that open coal storage right into the sandy ground below. Also, some of the coal conveyor infrastructure that is still remaining, just kind of a point of interest. So I will get to the meat of the issue here. This is the general thrust of the proposal that I came up with at the time. I was particularly interested in facing the communities that are directly adjacent to the site as it exists. I think one thing I felt at the time and still feel is that it could be really problematic to essentially transform this into a site that is only relevant to people who are wealthy and coming from elsewhere. I think it was important to me that I wanted it to be accessible broadly beyond kind of locally to people that live adjacent to the site. And so that's the top diagram. You can see kind of the before on the left and the after on the right, kind of these connections spreading into the site. And then in the middle, kind of what you might call ecological systems footprint right now. And then on the right side, what that could potentially look like, which kind of focuses on the remediation of those ponds and the expansion of the beach area. And then the expansion of public access, things like beaches and docks and things like that on the bottom row. So this is generally the plan that I came up with. And I'm not going to focus on this very much because I want to talk more about some of the shoreline characteristics of this proposal. I can come back to this in a minute. So one of the things that I did was to basically do these kind of before and after renderings of some of the panoramic photos that I took while I was on site. And again, I was very interested in this idea that any kind of ecological restoration, or whatever phrase you want to use, I think restoration is a little bit loaded because we're not trying to restore to anything that used to be. It has to be a new system. At any rate, that this kind of ecological process would take a really long time. And I think those of you who are familiar with dune ecology know that has been traditionally called a successional ecology. It takes time for the right soil profiles and soil pHs to form so that different kinds of native vegetation and animals and systems can exist. It's not a fast process. And so I wanted to allow that process to take place kind of on its own terms, but with a little bit of help from some, human-built infrastructure. So one of the ideas that I'm just exploring in this graphic, again, obviously the before is on the top and the after is on the bottom. Basically, the use of this coal ash pipeline kind of as an exploratory walkway, I guess, infrastructure, which would allow people, as this kind of process is unfolding, to access the heart of the site and see these processes taking place over time. And it could, who knows what the possibilities for that would be, but I think it could be an interesting possibility for research and kind of understanding how those systems evolve and emerge over time. Primarily I'm thinking about the establishment of pioneer species like dune grass and later cottonwoods and things like that would emerge in more protected spots. Another quick before and after here. The top, I already showed this photo, but these kind of this area of coal storage that previously, or I'm sure still exists on the site. And the transition of this site into something like kind of one of the intermediate zones of the dune ecological system, the successional system, like a open pine barren or something like that. I also want to note, I've said multiple times that I think it's a really important opportunity to continue or to maintain the presence of these old pieces of infrastructure on the site. And just as an example of that, one of the things that I'm showing on the kind of left of the drawing here is the use of one of these smaller, what I think is a settling pond, as kind of a public point of focus and walkways that cut into the topography and weave throughout the site from points of focus like this. And then this is a little bit fanciful at the time, but kind of an interesting idea. I was also interested in public infrastructure. So, I thought it would be cool at the time, a bit of a pipe dream, but to use these coal conveyors essentially as a public infrastructure. And so I think that, this is I think demonstrates an important point, which is that the way that I was trying to approach this was not just purely about the question of ecological restoration or whatever you'd want to call it, but also about a very clear vision for how the community, the public would be able to access and move through the site, not just kind of as this, extension of a national park, which has a lot of limitations and a very specific way of managing land, which is not what I was interested in at the time. So that's a you know, a design position that I took, and this is kind of the representation of establishing, you know, these kind of pathways and ways for people to move through the site. Another important idea for establishing this kind of long duration plan, and you know, before I say this, I will give a disclaimer that it's a theory. I can't vouch for the rates of sand accretion that would actually take place. But I was really interested in working in concert with the kind of existing longshore currents and patterns of sand movement and deposition along the shores of the lake, and figuring out, at least theoretically, a way to kind of gather more sand and build new landforms, essentially, through existing natural processes. One of the major barriers to this is that the Michigan City jetty kind of, you know, blocks a lot of these movements. Anyway, so what I'm showing here essentially is this blue arrow is the movement of those longshore currents, littoral drift down the shore of the lake. And then the idea was to basically place kind of permeable infrastructure, as indicated by these dotted red lines, along the shore perpendicular to that drift, to essentially provide baffles for the water, slow the flow of the water down, and force sediment to accumulate, and thus, you know, kind of build new foredunes that would expand the beach. Again, it's a theory. I can't vouch for how fast that would actually take place. But nevertheless, the idea or the hope was that on the right, you can see that by doing this, my hope was that it would kind of start to build a bigger beach and expand the public realm and public space on the lakeside of the property. So I'm just going to walk you through a few cross sections. So essentially what I'm doing here in the drawing is, you know, just making exactly what I said, a cross section, just taking a knife through the earth, cutting it in half and opening it up. Basically the white line you see running through the drawing is the top of the ground or the section, and everything below that is kind of what is below ground. So one of the things I will note here that NIPSCO was very clear in articulating to me when I went there was that there was no risk for groundwater contamination because the sheet piling had been driven directly into a subsurface layer of clay. It seemed a little bit far-fetched at the time. I'm sure there's more science on that I can't speak to at the moment, but something to take into consideration. Nevertheless, this is kind of showing those layers of armoring that I spoke about earlier. Some of these layers of riprap and sheet piling, another layer of riprap and sheet piling, and that the coal ash slurry pipeline on the top with the coal ash settling pond right kind of on the interior of that. So my proposal was that this would continue, as I mentioned earlier, to change gradually over time. And this is intended to be a vision of what the short-term change might look like. So I spoke a little bit earlier on a previous slide, this one, about this idea of kind of encouraging sand to settle and form new landforms. And the way that I proposed to do that was to essentially take this first layer of sheet piling, steel sheet piles along the edge of the lake, remove them, and basically turn them perpendicular to the flow of the water, and kind of essentially, in doing so, use a resource that exists on site to create this new process. And so essentially the idea is that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, this kind of leads to the gradual inhabitation of the site over time as people move through on purpose designed infrastructure, like this walkway I had proposed along on top of that existing coal slurry pipeline. Also on the right, one of the things I had proposed, this might be impossible now that I think these have been filled, but I thought it was interesting that this topographic form had been created, essentially the you know, the coal ash settling ponds, right? These kind of artificial depressions, which sort of mimicked the landforms of some of the intradunal wetlands that exist and are, I think, endemic or unique to the northern Indiana dunes ecosystems. One of them is called a PANNE, P-A-N-N-E. And so I was interested in understanding how to basically transform those settling pond basins into what would become kind of a new version or a, you know, revitalized version of the site in the form of a PANNE, one of these really unique ecosystems that is specific to this place. So the hope was that this process, setting this in motion, would begin to initiate this kind of successional ecosystem establishing a foredune beach grass, solidifying the sand with its dense root network. As more sand accumulates, cottonwoods start to grow up in the shelter as the sand, as these kind of sheltered coves are created by these small rises of sand. Yeah, and then essentially this would kind of transition away from the lake into the pan and then oak woodlands on the interior. So it would be sort of somewhere in between this very kind of constructed ecosystem, but also working within the context of native ecosystems. And this is imagining what that might look like after 10 plus years, in which the beach has grown and these sheet pilings are kind of used for different types as platforms for various types of public infrastructure like seating. The kind of ecosystems continue to expand, and public access is possible within limits, and essentially things are just continuing to grow and evolve. And then I'm just going to skip this one because I'm almost out of time, but I was, again, just this is an idea for asking, well, okay, so how do we continue to reuse all these existing materials? And one of the ways that I envisioned doing this was taking a lot of that old sheet piling, and in addition to placing it along the shoreline, to essentially cut through the existing kind of topography along the shoreline and create these walkways, basically that would allow for a direct connection to the water and the beach itself directly from the higher ground of the site. So that's really the majority of the vision. That's was kind of the direction I chose to go as an undergraduate. I also want to note, this is kind of an important point that I think has been a lot more prevalent in my work recently. I want to contextualize this just by saying that I think while visions like this can be helpful, I would argue that meaningfully addressing the question of environmental justice is also critical for the future of this site and others like it. So ecological restoration is inherently tied to environmental justice. It always has been and it always will be. So I don't want to belabor that point, and that's that. Thank you very much.
All right, it would be if anyone has any questions and like to drop them in the chat. Thank you, Dane, for the presentation. Learned so much about what could be possible on the site, especially when you kind of see it from the outside. It looks looming, like what could be possible. You really painted the vision in a way that I think opens up a lot of opportunities to vision what that could be.
So, Em, do we have questions in the chat?
So the one question is, looks like dune building marram grass would be planted at the site. I would say that from our perspective too in conservation, dune grass planted is always the first step in restabilizing our dunes. So, and then another question, who currently owns the land and who is going to own it after 2028?
Okay, I can address that. NIPSCO owns the land, and we don't exactly know who's going to own it after 2028, but NIPSCO will always own part of it because this is part of their transfer of energy from east to west and west to east. So those transmission lines and such are going to have to remain there. And I've spoken with vice president at NIPSCO, and that is the case. They're never going to totally vacate the property. They're going to have some kind of a footprint there.
We've got one request to say, please walk us through some of the major elements of the aerial view.
Oh,
Okay. We'll open this up again real quick. So I think, let's see, I talked through a lot of these things. I'm just going back to the plan here that were happening kind of along the shoreline. One of the really kind of important focus, I think, in addition to that, is the Trail Creek frontage, or at least from my perspective. which I thought would be an interesting, opportunity to expand things like, I don't know. I just remember growing up and going down the lighthouse pier and having a lot of people sitting and fishing out there. And I always thought that was such almost like a kind of romanticized way of being in the land and appreciating what's present around you. So I thought about, expanding opportunities for fishing and things like, launching canoes and kayaks and things like that. I know that there's a marina there, so I don't know exactly how that would work. I also, at the time, again, a bit of a pipe dream, but had imagined turning the cooling tower into a hotel. I don't know about that. And some other points of community access down here at the bottom near kind of this frontage with some of the North End neighborhoods. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I will note that I wanted to, or part of my proposal was to add kind of this area of housing at the bottom, which if I were to do this again, I would not do that. So I don't endorse that design decision. Otherwise, that really covers most of it. Trying to think here. I imagine that, so a lot of this beach, where letter I is up here on the very tip of the site, this currently exists. So, which is interesting because it gives some clues as to the way the site could be gradually inhabited, right? There's already something present rather than just saying, well, nobody can step foot here for 10 years or whatever. I think it, would be an interesting kind of tie into this long-term inhabitation question. So I labeled that essentially as the kind of initial site of a public beach and walkway, which would kind of lead into an embayment and wetland mouth. So I was imagining that one of these wetlands would essentially be something like a protected embayment wetland, which would be connected to the lake through this existing channel, again, which is sheet piled, but be able to fluctuate in response to water levels and things like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I've got lots of good questions coming in. One question is, what does ecological justice mean? I think they mean environmental justice, if you want to give a little.
Yeah, no, well, ecological justice, I mean, certainly environmental justice is, I don't know, maybe broadly writ, healing a lot of the harms of, or the need to heal the harms and acknowledge the harms of the ways that people are harmed when land is harmed. Ecological justice is more about acknowledging land as kind of made up of what we might call more than human relationships and providing the need for justice for other than human beings.
Awesome. This is a comment and a question. That's remarkable to think that this was that far ahead 15 years ago. Would you be interested in this stage of your life to execute your vision?
I mean, certainly, although I will say, I think it would take a lot of people a long time to do this work. So I'd love to work on it again. I think it would take a big team and a firm who has a lot of experience, especially in dealing with contaminants and phytoremediation and things like that. Sure, I'd love to revisit it.
Okay, we've got, what's to prevent some big development concern from coming in and taking over? Is a mega petition in order?
I'm gonna say one name, Mayor Angie.
Yeah.
She's our gate now, and she is not for a big developer coming in, taking this over and putting condos in or apartments or whatever. She does firmly believe that this should be something that's going to be community-based. So we have her. I would say we do have people on the city council also. I'm one of those people. And we have two others that are very environmentally committed. So this isn't going to happen. Just knowing what the leadership is in Michigan City right now. I know a lot of people in real estate would love to get their hands on it and develop condos, communities like they have up in New Buffalo, but let's face it, Michigan City is different, and I firmly believe we'll maintain our uniqueness, through this whole project.
And Save the Dunes is also invested in the future development of the site being used for nature-based solutions and at public access and its proximity to the national park. So we are on that side as well.
So I don't think we need to make a petition at this point, but whoever wrote that, RI, keep in contact with us, please.
Okay, from Indra, we've got, I'm worried that removing the sheet piling would allow the coal ash stored behind it to spill into the lake. Did you study how the made land would behave once the sheet piling has been removed?
I wish I had, but no. Great
And
question.
yeah, I can say the sheet piling cannot and is not going to be removed because it is that safeguard. And the land that's behind there, it is man-made land. It's a combination of coal ash, sand, and soil. So it's made up of those three elements.
Another question, how would you integrate environmental justice into your proposal?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would, well, I would say probably primarily that would be not qualified to address that concern, and that what would be required would be to work hand in hand with I don't know, Just Transition and Northside communities and people who are already doing that work, rather than claiming I could do it myself, I guess.
There is someone that says I'd like to hear more about the coal ash cleanup. I wonder if there's any other, they have been cleaned up, they have been capped at this point. I can say that much from Save the Dunes point of view. That was a big decree that happened and that got done. So I'm sure there's some more resources if you dig a little bit further, if you want more information about the process of that or who was kind of responsible. NIPSCO paid for all of that to get,
Yeah,
they were.
if I could make a comment, they hired a professional company which did it. And from everything we can see, and also from Representative Pat Boyd's point of view, they did it correctly. Everything that was asked of them, they did. People asked that the coal ash be hermetically sealed by plastic when it was being removed from the site. It was. They washed off the tires of the trucks. It was asked that they follow the same route when they took it away to the Schaefer plant in Stark County. Schaefer, Stark County, Jasper County. They did that. They were also requested to change the route so the coal ash would not go through the sensitive community of the pines. They did that. What activists in the community were asking for, NIPSCO very much realized the sensitivity of this issue, and they followed what was being asked of them. I think there's only maybe one or two items that they didn't honor, but for the most part, they even suspended the operation during COVID, realizing a lot of people that live on the west side have sensitivities with asthma, COPD, heart issues. They didn't do it for that period of year. They put it off for a full year. So from my standpoint, I think NIPSCO was very responsible for the whole removal process.
And then how many acres is the site in total?
I don't
know.
Do you know?
I have no idea.
Okay,
No.
we don't know.
Okay. NIPSCO is a private entity, and any redevelopment will need to make economic sense. There will be, in my opinion, multi-use housing, public use, green space. What about the Marquette Greenway plan? Does it hold any sway over future development? Well, I know that the Greenway goes right through that property at this point, or like really closely adjacent to the line. So I'm sure that if the Marquette Greenway goes through and the Indiana Dunes National Park continues to support that, it'll definitely be taken into consideration when those plans get made.
Yeah, and we also have the Marquette Plan that was pulled together by NIPSCO, which involved the participation of all of the cities and towns and counties in Northwest Indiana. And one of the provisions is that when these industrial sites become available, that they are to be returned to the public so that the public has access to the beaches and the lake that they did not have access to before. This isn't a law, it's just an agreement amongst the communities along the southern shore of Lake Michigan.
Another question about the national park, just a little information on its location. So at this point, the boundary of the national park is Mount Baldy and Crescent Dune, which Save the Dunes was a part of back in the 90s to get NIPSCO to sell Crescent Dune, which was their original buffer space between the plant and the park. So I'm sure that if it was decommissioned, the park would be interested in expanding its boundary to the east, and it's all going to be dependent on how it shakes out and where, and like other people are saying, the city's redevelopment and where, tax generation is coming from, all of that will definitely be part of the consideration.
Yeah, and I can also say too that the national park probably would not be interested in taking over all of the property just because of its legacy and the contaminants that are there and everything else. We're about at 7:30 right now. I did
Yeah.
want to answer the one question about a schedule of, when this is going to be happening and stuff like that. And as Dane referenced, it's going to take a very long time to get the site cleaned up and ready for anything. So even though the plant closes in 2028, there's going to have to be a remediation effort when it closes. I just attended a brownfields conference today. And, there's going to have to be a lot of work done before it's ready for anything. So who knows how long it's going to take. We are at 7:30. I know that there are still questions remaining here, but I think we need to do our wrap to honor people's time. And what I would like to do next is to ask Kathy Sipple to please give a brief introduction of our next Green Drinks, which is happening on November 7th. And we always meet the first Thursday of the month. So Kathy, would you like to share with them what you're going to be presenting to us?
Yes, thank you so much, Nancy. I want to say I met Nancy because she came to Green Drinks back way before Nancy started doing the Green Drinks. I did it for a few years, nowhere near 12 years, 13 years. But Green Drinks has always been our time to come together monthly and learn. And so since Nancy has been doing this so expertly along with Save the Dunes, I've been looking at what could my contribution be. And what I found is sometimes I would learn about activities or initiatives during Green Drinks, and I'd think, how can I get beyond just the questions in chat or the questions of the speaker afterwards and actually meet people who can help me plug into projects or teach me what to do? And so to that end, I have been working on a lot of different projects that recently have come under the umbrella of NWI, which stands for obviously Northwest Indiana Region Resilience. And I'm putting a few links in chat. We've introduced a whole new logo campaign, and now Green Drink shows up as one of the family of initiatives, along with 219 Green Connect, which Nancy always gives me so graciously credit for my podcast. Anyway, we just love to have you join in. And I love what Em said before, that this is different than a lot of Save the Dunes, where it's, hey, we're going to show you the expert. It's a vision. This is kind of like you enter the vision and you look for, what is my role to do? What is my gift that I have to share? And what would I like to learn from other people? So that's just a little taste of what we'll be talking about. Thanks, Nancy.
You're very welcome. Em, do you want to revisit the cloud?
The cloud, I couldn't add any more words on my end. It said I did my part. I couldn't add any more.
That's okay. No, can we bring it up just for people to see,
Yeah.
how it turned out? I think that would be a really nice wrap up. And while
Yeah.
Em's trying to find that, Dane, thank you so very much for coming back and joining us. And this has been really enjoyable. Dane also made the offer of doing a Green Drinks on his work in Asia with restoration and people. Is that something you'd be interested in hearing what he's, yeah, I'm seeing some yeses there. You know, Dane, we may take you up on that, you know, in, you know, next year or maybe, you know, after that, whatever, you know, depending on what our schedule looks like. But I think it'd be extremely interesting to be exposed to what's going on in other parts of our world.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. I can, let's see. Not while I'm full screen on Mentimeter, I can't. Okay, are we seeing this?
Okay, well, this is interesting because nature and public are the same size now.
Yes, it does look that way. So it looks good.
And all of you that signed up to receive this, it will be sent to your email address.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Please, I know most of you have stayed up to date with Save the Dunes on our e-newsletter. Maybe that's the reason how you found out about tonight's presentation. So thank you so much for following along on that. We've got all of our upcoming events posted up on our website. So check that out if you're looking for something to do in the next coming weeks. And as always, we appreciate you spending your evening with us, learning about something we care so deeply about. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening.